Test, test, test. All right. Shalom to the elect of Israel. I'm going to start by giving all praises to Yahweh. Praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh. Bahashim Yahweh Shai, Bahashim Hakodash. Give me 1 second, real quick. Slacking. All praises, honor, and glory belongs to Yahweh, Bahashim Yahweh Shai, Bahashim Hakodash. What I said was all the praises, honor, and glory belongs to Yahweh, who is the heavenly Father, whom the world ignorantly calls God, in the name of his Son, Yahweh Shai, who is the Messiah, whom the world ignorantly calls Jesus, in the name of the Holy Spirit, which in Hebrew is Ruach Kodash. Rachal meaning spirit and Kodash meaning holy. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, never well. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect of Israel. And this lesson, I want to go into Daniel the 8th chapter. All right. Um, and get some history and but first let me start off just by saying Salakia, if I'm not able to get through all of it because it's different I'm kind of somewhat in a public area, so people might be coming in here, got to keep it kind of got to be Clark Kent when you're around these people. All right, so Salakia, if I have to maybe do a part 2 or something like that. All right. And also Salakia, if my because my computer freezes sometimes, and I have to restart it. So if that happens, just skip ahead to where I continue to talk. All right. Or if I have to go on mute, just skip ahead, for a quick second. Just skip ahead to where I continue to talk. But Lord willing, I can get to this whole thing, um, you know, peacefully without any interruptions. All right. But yeah, just letting you know in advance. Okay. If I didn't say it already, double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect of Israel. So, going into Daniel, the 8th chapter, and it's like when you go into this chapter, man, it's like once you understand it, it's like, how can anybody deny the Apocrypha is not a part of the Bible? Like, that's crazy. That is absolute madness. Okay. You know, so let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Uh, Slack you. Yeah, it might move a little slow because I have a lot of tabs open right now. So lock it. Right, just bear with me though. All right. So here we go. And Lord willing, as I move along, I will I will you know close tabs and it should move faster. All right. So let's go ahead. It's the book of Daniel. All right, the prophet Daniel. Um there's like a lot of tabs open. So lock you about this. Okay. So this is the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter, right? Starting at verse 1. Okay. And Daniel, as we know, is a prophet. All right. In the Hebrew, Danya Allah, meaning my God is judge, my power is judge. Dun, meaning judge. Yah Allah meaning power. Okay. So, altogether, Danya Allah. All right. My judge is the most high. Danya, my judge, Allah, meaning, God, power. All right. And the Lord will give, visions and, which are prophecies to his servants, all right, to his prophets, all right. So the prophets received visions of things in the ancient world and wrote them down for us, today. But this here, this specific one, this is for an ancient time. Okay, this happened already. Okay, it was written in this chapter. This already happened. It was fulfilled and it's documented history. So how could anybody describe, say the Bible is not real? Anyways, it's the book of Daniel, chapter 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. All right. So in the 3rd year, all right, in the 3rd year of the reign of this King Belshazzar, or this Babylonian King Belshazzar, a vision was given unto the prophet Daniel. All right. When you look at this word vision, it's lucky because it's going to take a minute. It's going to take a minute. a minute. Just gotta ease on down the road here. Vision is chazawon. All right, that's the Hebrew word for chazawon. And it just getting right to the point. It says vision, oracle, prophecy. All right, divine communication, vision, and night. You know, a dream, i.e., it says a sight mentally, i.e., a dream, revelation, or oracle. You know, the prophets would have these visions. Okay, and at this point in time, right, the prophet Daniel had this vision. Once again, it was not for the time period he was living in, and that is why the scriptures say. I'm gonna just read this off my phone. All right, bear in just 1 second. This is the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, and verse 3. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Now, this was, good, and this is reading from the book of Habakkuk, but this also applies to other prophets. All right. Why? Because, the ancient prophets, they would, have visions. All right. Some of them would have visions that wouldn't be for the time period that they're living in. They would be for, maybe like the end times, like these times we're living in now. Okay. Or it could be a little, ahead in the future of the time that they were living in. You see, so that's the case here in this chapter, right? With that, and with this vision that was given to the prophet Daniel, Habakkuk 2 and 3. For the vision or the prophecy, right, that was that the Lord gave to the prophets, right, is yet for an appointed time. See, it's all for a certain time period. But at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come and will not tarry. Right. But this, was right, this vision that the prophet Daniel had was for an appointed time period. All right, in the future, ahead of his time. See, and it goes to show you, like the Lord, man, you know, hey, as he said, before they spring forth, I tell you of them. All right, by way of the prophets, everything that was, with, the things that were going on ahead, with the Maccabees, Antiochus, all of that stuff, that was already, foreseen. Okay, and it was meant to happen. Nothing is out of the Lord's control. So Daniel 8:2 says, and I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Now, Elam, right? Look it up. Basically, all right, it was over here. All right, this is the province of Elam, and when you look up Shushan, it goes into Susa, okay? Which is, so Daniel was like in this area over here, okay? And within the province of Elam. He was like in this area where he had this vision at. All right. X that out. It says, then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns. And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came a blast. And another thing with these visions that the Lord would give to his servants, the prophets, right? Sometimes, they would see something, but it would mean something. It would mean, it would have like a representation of something. It would have a meaning, a deeper meaning to it. All right. It would signify something. All right. You know, like Daniel here in this vision, he saw a ram having two horns, and the horn that the ram had, one of the horns was higher than the other, and it came a blast. And I have something, to depict it, give you an image, a ram here and a horn, right? And the horn that came a blast that was higher. All right. And this represented the Medo-Persian Empire, okay, also known as the Achaemenid Empire. All right, and there's history around this. All right, so it says, "Then I lifted up," and this was all ahead of Daniel's time. It says that I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns. Right, and these, being that this represents the Medo-Persian Empire, right? This well, it says Medo-Persian. All right, it was, you could say, two kingdoms ruling at once, but one was greater than the other. It says, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other. Right now, I type on Google, what was the Medo-Persian Empire? It says the Medo-Persian Empire was a powerful ancient kingdom. And Persian, Persia, all right, they're the modern day Iranians. Before they were called Iran, before it was called Iran, it was called Persia. All right, but it says it was a powerful ancient kingdom, essentially the Achaemenid Empire, formed by the union of the Medes, one horn, and Persians, that greater horn, under Cyrus the Great. It says, rising after conquering the Babylonians around 539 BCE, known for its vast size from Egypt to India, advanced administration, roads, postal system, religious tolerance, allowing Jews to return, a significant role in biblical history. All right, books of Daniel, Esther. All right. It says the Medes initially held power, but Cyrus the Great of Persia led a revolt. So the Medes, they were the first one, holding that power seat, right? But it says, but Cyrus the Great of Persia led a revolt, conquering the Medes and establishing a dual monarchy, like a rulership of two kingdoms. That became the Persian Empire, often called Medo-Persian Empire. You see? So it says the Medes initially held power, all right? But later on, Cyrus the Great of Persia led a revolt. See? So in this vision, it says the ram that had two horns, Mede, the kingdom of the Medes, and the kingdom of Persia. It says that the two horns was high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. That represents the Persians, because initially, once again, the Medes had the power seat. They were in rulership first. Then later on, all right, by Cyrus the Great, through Cyrus the Great, the Persians came up into power. All right, and they ruled over the Medes. They had that supreme power seat. All right, over the Medes. Okay, it says here, in essence, the Medo-Persian Empire was the powerful Persian Empire, recognized by its dual nature, Medes and Persians, and its vast influence during the ancient world, especially in biblical accounts. All right, so that's what this ram represents. All right, this is just an illustration. Okay, but the ram represents the Medo-Persian Empire, now also called the Achaemenid Empire. Right now, it says here on Wikipedia, the Achaemenid Empire was an ancient Iranian empire founded by Cyrus the Great of the Achaemenid dynasty in 550 BC. In 550 BC, it says at peak, its territorial extent was roughly 5.5 million square kilometers, making it the largest empire of its time based in the Iranian plateau. It stretched from the Balkans and Egypt in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, including Anatolia, Cyprus, Mesopotamia, the Levant, parts of Eastern Arabia, and the large parts of Central Asia. Talking about the ultimate um, territory it had. Okay, overall, right? But that's the right. That's the Achaemenid Empire, basically. Like kind of like in a nutshell. All right, just X that out. Okay, what it said, higher came up last. All right, this is what this horn is. Now, it said the higher came up last, and that happened by Cyrus the Great, who was Persian. It says in 550 BC, Cyrus the Great defeated Astyages. Now, Cyrus the Great, so this guy right here. This is a ancient carving of him, right? Somebody made back then, but it says Cyrus the Second of Persia, commonly known or also known as Cyrus the Great, was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, hailing from Persis. And Persis, also called Persia proper, which is in this area over here, okay, on the other side of the Persian Gulf from Arabia, right? That's where he came from. It says hailing from Persis, meaning he came from that area, Persis. He brought the Achaemenid dynasty to power by defeating the Median Empire. So the Median Empire was already established, and through Cyrus the Great, right, it came, the Persians, or that other horn, the higher one, came up last. It says that embracing all of the previous civilized states of the ancient Near East, etc., right? But going here, I want to read this. It says, in 550 BC, Cyrus the Great defeated Astyages and conquered Ecbatana, forming the Achaemenid Empire. So when he did this, took over all the Medes, All right. It says Astyages was the last king of the Median kingdom, reigning from 585 to 550 BCE, the son of Cyaxares. He was dethroned by the Persian king Cyrus the Great. Right? It says and conquered Ecbatana, forming the Achaemenid Empire. All right. That's what I wanted. That's all I wanted to get from right there. I believe. Yeah. Okay. So going on. Let me see here. Right. So now we understand that. All right. But when it says they defeated them, everything, right? When they conquer, the Medes, it's not like they conquered them and then that was the end of the Medes. No, they ruled, together basically. Let me read something else. All right, jumping down under Cyrus the Great, it says after absorbing the Median Empire. See, after absorbing it, right? So he brought it in. You know, they were ruling as well with him. It says after absorbing the Median Empire, Cyrus conquered Lydia and eventually the Neo-Babylonian Empire. See, granting him control of Anatolia and the Fertile Crescent, which is this region of here. Okay, it says respectively. All right, and that's also in the next part. But I wanted to focus on that, which says after absorbing the Median Empire. Let me jump down. Okay. Um. All right. Yeah. So let me just go back to the top up here. Okay. So, so yeah, it said after absorbing the Median Empire. Now, I'm gonna come back to this, right? Because I'm gonna reread that other part some more. But here it says Median Kingdom, right? Now, here, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? All right, I'm gonna read some more here. Where is it? What I'm looking for? Just lucky because it was something I read earlier. Okay, well, I mean, I think I might have just wanted to show this. Wait, is it in the next part? Yep, it's in the next part. Yeah, I wanted to show because once again, when Cyrus, the Persians took over, they didn't just completely annihilate the Medes. No, you know, um, the Medes were a part of the empire. You see, and this is it says Achaemenid bas relief. This is basically a sculpture. It says from the 5th century BCE, showing a Median soldier behind the Persian soldiers. So you see, they were a part of the same empire, but the more prominent or important ones, or significant ones, was the Persians. You see? Oh man, I shouldn't have done that. Damn, Salakia. All right. Here it says Cyrus's conquest of Media brought about a profound shift in the geopolitical situation across the ancient Near East. Media was governed by a Persian governor, and taxes were collected as any conquered territory. Ecbatana, due to its strategic importance in dominating Central Asia, became one of the capitals of the newly established Achaemenid Empire, Salakia, right? It says the Persians adopted the Median system of state administration, which in turn contained many features of the Assyrian system. In the Achaemenid Empire, media retained its privileged position, ranking second only to Persia itself. See that? Second, the higher one, Persia came up last. All right. So that means what? The Medes were who? You know, they were that was they were not as important. So this is just proof that that ram that Daniel saw in his vision represented the Medo-Persian Empire. It says part of the Median nobility maintained their privileged status under Cyrus and also under his successors. So they were part of their nobility, maintain that privileged status they had. All right, but all right. So that's that. All right. Now we understand what this horn is. I mean, what this ram is here. Okay. Now it says here, verse 4, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. Now, being that this ram is the Medo-Persian or Achaemenid Empire, right? You can call them either or. It says pushing westward and northward and southward. Give me just 1 second. All right. Daniel 8 and 4. Now, these represent the main empires or strongholds at that time. The Achaemenid Empire, had basically took down, right? Which was Babylon, which would be west of where Daniel was, which was Susa, right? You're looking at a map from before, you can, just skip back to it. All right, west of where Susa was Babylon, right? All right, and Lydia, which is basically Asia Minor, would be north. Okay. Um, and Egypt would be southward. Okay. And Cyrus, as I said, led the great Cyrus the Great led the conquest of Lydia and Babylon. That's what he had done. All right. As it says here, after absorbing the Median Empire, Cyrus conquered Lydia and eventually the Neo-Babylonian Empire, granting him control of Anatolia, which is Asia Minor, which is where Lydia is at, and the Fertile Crescent, which is over here. These were conquered by Cyrus the Great, right? Respectively, okay? Um, so yeah, right there. All right, and his son Cambyses. All right, it says regardless, he conquered Egypt. It says regardless of the date of his death, he was succeeded by his son Cambyses II. All right, it says whose campaigns into North Africa led to the conquest of Egypt, Nubia, and Cyrenaica. I'm saying that right? During his short rule. Okay. Um, was there more over here that I was trying to? Okay, no. No. All right, I could close this out. Okay. But ultimately, even though it's talking about, even though we went through Cyrus the Great and then his son Cambyses II, these were ultimately what? These were ultimately Achaemenid Empire taking these places down. Okay. So he closes out. And this was the empire, of Cyrus the Great under his rulership. This was the Achaemenid Empire during Cyrus the Great's rulership. You see Asia Minor, you know, um, the Fertile Crescent conquered, So he got this. And notice how in Daniel 8 it doesn't say eastward. So I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, but not eastward, because they already came from the east. Okay? They already came from over here. All right. And I just want to get all right. Let me just see. Okay. All right. Yeah, and some basically prominent battles that showed that, showed that they conquered it, like decisive battles, battles that show victory, like basically battles that made like basically battles that how I say it, decisive over whether the empire, the Achaemenid Empire, was going to acquire those areas was, like the final battle was one of them was Battle of Thimbra, right? The Battle of Thimbra or Thimbra was a decisive battle in the war between Croesus of the Lydian kingdom and Cyrus the Great of the Achaemenid Empire. The Lydian kingdom, as you see, is you know, Asia Minor over here. All right. It said, and that was that that was that northward, I believe. Bear with me 1 second. Yeah. Okay. It says, and that was a decisive battle. Says Cyrus, after he had pursued Croesus into Lydia after the drawn battle of Pteria, how do you say that? Met the remnants of Croesus's partially disbanded army in battle on the plain north of Sardis in December 547 BC. Croesus's army was about twice as large and had been reinforced with many new men, but Cyrus still utterly defeated it. That proved to be decisive. See, Cyrus still utterly defeated it. That proved to be decisive. And after the 14-day siege of Sardis, the city and possibly its king fell. Lydia was conquered by the Persians. All right, and that's when the Achaemenid Empire, that ran, you know, took over Asia Minor. That northward. Okay, and as far as southward being Egypt, right? It says the Battle of Pelusium was the first major battle between the Achaemenid Empire and Egypt. This decisive battle transferred the throne of the pharaohs to Cambyses II of Persia, marking the beginning of the Achaemenid 27th dynasty of Egypt. All right, and Cambyses II is Cyrus the Great's son. Okay, and this battle was the one that basically gained the Achaemenid Empire, Egypt. That's that southward. Okay, so you know, and ultimately, this is the Achaemenid Empire, under Cyrus and then Cambyses. I'm just looking at the green and the blue for right now, not the red. All right. So this ram, okay, that the prophet Daniel saw in his vision, represented the Medo-Persian, or in other words, Achaemenid Empire, and this was the silver, okay, in Daniel, and it's like in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, okay. This was the silver, all right, and this was also the second beast in Daniel the 7th chapter, right? Now, verse 5, Daniel 8 and 5, it says, and as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. All right. And this is talking about, and this, let me just, give you an illustration. Okay. You know, it says, and he goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And this represents the Greek Empire. Okay. Um, So, Daniel is watching this ram, and then this he goat pops up, right, coming from the west, all right? And it said came from the west because that's the direction that Alexander the Great had came from. He came from Macedon, which was in the west, all right, as we see here on this map, all right? He was from Macedonia. Macedon, he came from this area, and this is in the west, you know? You look at these maps, it's like you look at these maps and stuff, they basically all say that he came from the west. Okay. Came right up here, etc. Back. There's another map saying that. Let me X this out. Showing that he came from the west over here in Macedon. All right. See, the trail starts like right here over this way. He did his route from here. Another one. See, Macedonia, etc. And he was an Edomite, and this was the beginning. When Esau really came into rulership in the world, on earth. This was the beginning, the Greek Empire. All right. Okay. So going back, all right. It says, and as I was considering, behold, an he goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. Right? Meaning the Greek Empire led by Alexander was conquering all the way from Macedon to the east, as we saw. It says, as they were coming to the east, they were conquering and moved swiftly. All right. It says, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. That's Alexander the Great. And he came to the ram that had two horns. So in his vision, the he goat comes to the ram with two horns. It says, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. To help you understand from the vision standpoint, you can imagine something like this. Okay, the goat coming to the ram. And this signifies something once again. All right. It says, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. It says, and I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Right. And this is basically talking about Alexander the Great defeating the Medo-Persian Empire. And they were very passionate about defeating the Medo-Persian Empire, because that word choler, as the apostles went into it in a breakdown before, is marar, right? It says to be bitter, to show bitterness, to bitter, to be enraged, be moved with choler. All right, so they were passionate about taking them down. Okay, because Alexander the Great, the Achaemenid Empire was conquered by Alexander the Great, which was an Edomite. Okay, and when you read Revelation 13:1, I'll just read it from my phone here, right? Revelation 13, Slocket, and verse 2 says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, right? Because that was the beginning of Esau's rule in the earth. Okay. Um, the leopard represents Alexander the Great. When you go to Daniel 7, it talks about a leopard. All right. It was like unto a leopard or something like that. Okay, in Daniel the 7th chapter, that's the third beast. This is the brass. This is the brass in Nebuchadnezzar's vision from Daniel the 2nd chapter. Okay. So, ultimately, this is talking about the Greek Empire coming down, and Alexander the Great coming down, taking down the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, when you have here, okay, let me get this out of here. Alexander the Great, right? Alexander the Third of Macedon. It says most commonly known as Alexander the Great was king of the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedon. He succeeded his father Philip II to the throne in 336 BC at the age of 20, and spent most of his regency conducting a lengthy military campaign throughout parts of Asia and Egypt. By the age of 30, he had the age of 20, all right, he got to the throne. So by the age of 30, he had created one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece to northwestern India. He was undefeated in battle and is widely considered to be one of history's greatest and most successful military commanders. All right, this is this guy right here. Okay, the devil. All right, the Edomite, going to slavery in the kingdom. Okay, it says Alexander was tutored by Aristotle until the age of 16. All right, so you can read no more history on him. But it says Alexander then assumed leadership of the League of Corinth, created by his father, and with his authority over all Greeks, he launched a pan-Hellenic campaign to invade the Achaemenid Persian Empire. All right, so there you have it. Now, let me see, conquest, the Achaemenid Empire, right? Where was it? I ain't gonna go through that. I'm gonna come back to this one, will I? But here, you read, it says Battle of Gaugamela. It says the Battle of Gaugamela, also called the Battle of Arbela, took place in 331 BC between the forces of the army of Macedon under Alexander the Great and the Persian army under King Darius III, which is, as it says, Darius III was the 13th and last Achaemenid king of kings of Persia, reigning from 336 BC to his death in 330 BC. All right. It says it was the second and final battle between the two kings, and is considered to be the final blow to the Achaemenid Empire, resulting in its complete conquest by Alexander. And you read over here in First Maccabees 1:1, it says, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chedum, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. All right, so that links up perfectly. All right, this battle of Gaugamela, they say was the that basically final blow to the Achaemenid Empire and conquering it. You know, this is a picture. Okay, see Alexander the Great here. You know, and you see with the sword. This is what happens. This is part of Esau's blessing. Remember, he was blessed with the sword. All right, but and something, because even in the Bible, like Christians will read out of the Bible, where they won't read the Apocrypha, but in the Bible it talks about Alexander the Great. It talks about these things. See, so going back. Oh, Rock, let me read this before I forget. It says here, here it says, I just want to read this here. It says, Alexander's death marks the conventional beginning of the Hellenistic period. So after he died, this marked the beginning of the Hellenistic period, which the Hellenistic period, as it says, covers the time and well, I'm gonna get to it. But it says through his conquest, he built a legacy that includes the cultural diffusion and syncretism. It says is the combining or merging of various distinct beliefs or schools of thought. Syncretism, all right. It says is when certain elements, features, and components of a religion are incorporated and absorbed into another religion or faith. It directs some sort of difference in both religions. Right? It says which gave rise to Greco-Buddhism and Hellenistic Judaism. All right. It says he founded more than 20 cities, with the most prominent being the city of Alexandria in Egypt. All right, because that city was named after him. He wanted the city named after him. When you read about it, you can just type this up and read about it. This ain't no profound, deeply sought after, like, you can just type it in and read about it. It says Alexander's establishment of Greek colonies and the spreading of Greek culture. Read it again. Alexander's establishment of Greek colonies. All right. Him, conquering is, setting up, Greek rulership in different places where he conquered at. It says in the spreading of Greek culture. Okay. That culture the Greeks had led to Hellenistic civilization, which Hellenistic basically means, you're adopting Greek ways and cultures. All right. It says led, so him doing all of that, his conquering and all of that, said led to Hellenistic civilization becoming a major force in the ancient world. You see, so when you read about the New Testament Greeks, listening to the word, repenting and all of that, where it says, there's neither a bond nor free. Let me just get it actually. Because Christians love to use this one. Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. Where it says, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, if you're all one in the Mashiach Yahushai. It says Greek because this is not saying that, this is not talking about non-Israelites, like a literal Greek, but it's talking about an Israelite that took on Greek customs and cultures and ways of life. And we're reading the history all the way back here, from where it started. So, this is the history that, a lot of Christians are ignorant of, and don't know about and understand. They just see, when they think of Jew, they automatically think of Israelite, and when they see Greek, they automatically think of non-Israelite. But it's just but this is the history that goes into um why there are Greek Israelites in the New Testament. Those Greeks that listen, or Slaki, those Greeks that took on adult, those Slaki, those Israelites that took on Greek cultures and ways of life, man. This is why. Let me just look at this word Greek here. It says Hellen. Why? Hellenistic as we going into. You're gonna see it goes deeper too. All right, it says a Greek either by nationality, whether a native of the mainland or the Greek islands or colonies. It says, in a wider sense, the name embraces all nations, not Jews that made the language, customs, and learning of the Greeks their own. The primary reference is to a difference of religion and worship. All right. It says, by extension, a Greek speaking person, especially a non Jew, all right, Gentile Greek. Now it says that, but we know that Israelites took on the ways of the Greeks, okay? And not only the Greeks, but the Romans and all of that stuff and different the places where they were at, okay? Because Christians, Slakia, because of this, I got two thoughts colliding because of this curse here, Deuteronomy 28 and 64. And Yahweh shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And so the Lord would scatter the Israelites, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. So you had Israelites, living amongst the heathens, okay, scattered, all right, like you do to this day, and they worshiping other gods, okay, taking on, worshiping other gods, man. They worshiping Greek gods, all that stuff, okay. For example, let's go to Acts chapter 6. You have to know this history. Acts chapter 6, verse 1. It says, and in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. When we look at this word Grecians, it's Hellenistes, right? Strong's G 1675 Hellenistes. And you can always look up, specific Strong's just by, getting that part. In the Old Testament, I might say H such numbers, numbers afterwards, or New Testament G, he H standing for Hebrew, G standing for Greek. The Hellenistes is Hellenist, one who imitates the manners and customs or the worship of the Greeks and use the Greek tongue. Used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. Why? Because going back, to the time period of the Hellenization of the Israelites, which we're about to get, all right. Um, you know, Israel was Hellenized. They was forcefully and also voluntarily took on Greek cultures and ways of life. So from we would think from that time period, right, the descendants of those you know Israelites that adopted Greek cultures and ways of life, they were raising their children up to be Greeks. Even though they're Israelites, they're raising them up in Greek culture. So the Greeks that listened, all right, so-called Greeks in the New Testament that listened and everything, right? They would be what? Israelites, but raised up in Greek culture. That's what it is, over generation of time of raising up their children in Greek cultures and ways of life, even though they're Israelites. So you would have Jews and Israelites walk back. You would have Jews back then walking around. You would have the Israelites walking back then walking around thinking they're Greek. That's why it says that. Okay. So when we go back here, right, it says so, and it all started from Alexander the Great conquering. That's how it even uh, was able to even that's how the Hellenization was able to even happen. All right, because it started with Alexander the Great, an Edomite, conquering the whole, conquering a known world at the time. So it says Alexander's establishment of Greek colonies and the spreading of Greek culture led to Hellenistic civilization becoming a major force in ancient world. So this was no small thing. All right. You're talking about a new world power, all right, that took over back then. All right. Becoming a major force in the ancient world. It says influencing regions as far as the Indian subcontinent. The Hellenistic period developed through the Roman Empire into modern Western culture. The Greek language became the lingua franca or common language of the region and was the predominant language of the Byzantine Empire until its collapse in 1453 AD. All right. So that's that. All right. Did I get yeah, and this was the one that once again the Battle of Gaugamela, if I'm saying that right, was they said was the final blow for the Greeks to fully defeat the Achaemenid Empire. So now let's go back to Daniel the 8th chapter. All right. Right. Where is it? Daniel. So Daniel 8, verse 8 through 6, 8, starting verse 6 again. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against the ram, against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. This is ultimately the Lord causing these prophecies to go by, setting these kings up, everything. All right. We know he's the one that holds the power. Verse 8. Therefore the he goat waxed very great. And when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and four came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. Yeah, the he goat Alexander the Great became great. Check that out. All right. As it says here, Alexander became a legendary hero similar to Achilles, featuring prominently in the historical and mythical traditions of both Greek and non Greek cultures. His military achievements and successes in battle made him the touchstone against which many later military leaders would judge themselves. His tactics remain of significance. Um, Basically, just showing, also showing how became great to the point of becoming like a legendary battle hero or war hero. All right. Um, as it says in First Maccabees here, we go back to the chapter view. It says First Maccabees 1:1, and it happened after that Alexander the son of Philip, the Macedonian who came out of the land of Chedum, had smitten Darius king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece, and made many wars and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him. See? Whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries under him, unto him. Talking about Alexander the Great's conquests and all the things he did. Okay, and taking over nations, etc. All right. Now it says, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. All right. And the Greek Empire became great. It says, therefore the he goat waxed very great. The Greek Empire became great. It says, that's the he goat. The he goat is the Greek Empire, and then the horn is specifically Alexander the Great. So Slovakia. All right, about that. The he goat is the Greek Empire became great. And it says when he was strong, right? Bear with me 1 second. And when he was strong, meaning when the Greeks got to the height of their empire, which is when they had expanded and gotten all their territory, right? The great horn was broken. Alexander, who is the horn, died. Okay. And and by the way, this was the empire of Alexander the Great. Okay, this was his empire. All right. All that, man. All right. And how long did he reign? This is Alexander the Great reigned for about 13 years, from 336 BCE, when he became king of Macedonia at age 20, until his death in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32, during which time he built one of the largest empires of the ancient world, stretching from Greece to India. Okay. Um, yeah, and then the scripture says, uh, verse 7, just jumping ahead. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died. So about 12 years. Okay. And he's trying to say 13, but basically 12 years. We're going to go with the scripture says. All right. Um, so yeah, so he died. All right. As it says here, let me just read this first. It says, and when he was strong, when the Greek Empire got to its height, the great horn was broken. Alexander the Great, died. It says, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. Same thing is basically said here in First Maccabees 1, verse 5. It says, and after these things he fell sick and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule everyone in his place. Okay. And that's exactly what happened. All right. Let me go up here. Let me get this out the way. All right, close these out. With Alexander the Great. All right. Um, where is it? See if I can get straight to it. All right. For example, right here, part of his early life, it says, Nietza was like a boarding school for Alexander and the children of Macedonian nobles, such as Ptolemy, Hephaestion, and Cassander. Many of these students will become his friends and future generals, and are often known as the companions. You see, Cassander was one of his future generals, and Ptolemy. Okay, so that's on point. All right, and as it says, Daniel 8, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven, because after he died, all right. By the way, about the Hellenistic period, it says the word Hellenistic is derived from the Greek word for Greek or Hellen or Hellene. The Hellenistic period was a time when Greek and foreign cultures mixed. Okay, and what is the Hellenistic period? Right, it says was the era after Alexander the Great's conquest, defined by the spread of Greek culture across the Eastern Mediterranean, Middle East, and Asia, blending Greek ideas with local traditions to create a new cosmopolitan world. We'll just look up that definition, cosmopolitan, real quick. Cosmopolitan definition. It says here, cosmopolitan means worldly, sophisticated, and comfortable in many cultures, stemming from the Greek for a citizen of the world. All right. So that's basically, it says it began with Alexander's death, leading to the fragmentation or splitting of his empire among successors, also known as Diadochi or Diadochi, however you say it, and ended with Rome's conquest of Ptolemaic Egypt, marking the rise of large kingdoms and major advancements in arts, science, and philosophy. And this is when, how Esau, tries to tell you, um, is when Esau, tried to tell you civilization started with the Greeks, which is false. That's just when his rule in the earth began. Civilization was happening way before Esau got into power, man. Okay, but so the four notable ones, all right? Because after Alexander died, let's read. It says, the Diadochi were the rival generals, families, and friends of Alexander the Great, who fought for control over his empire after his death in 323 BC. The wars of the Diadochi marked the beginning of the Hellenistic period from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River Valley. So after Alexander the Great's death, as they say here in 323 BC, his generals fought for control over his empire. All right. So his empire is basically split up between his generals. And after his death marked the beginning of that Hellenistic period. All right. It marked, which is when, which is basically that Greek culture being spread, throughout that whole known world. And that is why you get um, Israelites in the New Testament called Greeks, all right, that believed the gospel, believed the preaching, all right, that the apostles and disciples had sent out, all right. That's why it'll say there's neither Jew nor Greek. It's not talking about not Israelites in general, okay, but it's, the Jew raised up in the customs, you know, and in the law, and in the land of Israel, all of that, right, and the Greek, the Israelite raised up in Greek culture. But this is the background to it that Christians don't understand. So it says the wars of the Diadochi marked the beginning of the Hellenistic period from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River Valley. The most notable Diadochi include Ptolemy, Antigonus, Cassander, and Seleucus as the last remaining at the end of the wars of the successors. I believe that's what Diadochi means, successors. All right. It says that's the most notable. All right. These four, Slakia, Ptolemy, Antigonus, Cassander, and Seleucus. All right. As the last remaining at the end of the wars of the successors. Right. Those are his four generals, as it says, Daniel 8 and 8. and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. All right. It says ruling in Egypt, that was Ptolemy, I believe, Asia Minor, all right, Macedon, whatever Greek, and Persia, all right, it's respectively. It says with Ptolemaic, Antigonid, and Seleucid dynasties lasting several centuries. Okay, these are those four notable ones. All right, those are the four. All right, that was at the last remaining at the end of the wars, at the end of those wars. Right, as it says here, the Diadochi, the successors of Alexander the Great, the generals, his four generals, fought over and carved up Alexander's empire into several kingdoms after his death, a legacy which continued the influence of ancient Greek culture abroad for over 300 more years. This is history Christians leave out. They don't understand. So they doing all of this, laughing, mocking, and scoffing. Yet they don't understand this history. All right. Maybe some of them, might to a degree, but yeah, they don't really understand it. Okay. So Diadochi, as it says here, we're just going to get the notable four. Cassandra over here. These, the key down here. Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. All right. I believe one of us said Antigonus, Salaki. All right. But basically, I'm going to focus on this yellow part pretty much. I'm going to focus on this yellow part. All right. This was the, and primarily down here. All right. We're going to get into that a little later, but solution. All right. And the scriptures talk about that. When it happened, what did it say? First Maccabees 1, verse 9, it says, and after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. That's what happens when you let the wicked get into rulership. Evils are multiplied in the world. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 2, it says, the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn, and we know who the wicked are. Malachi 1 and 4 tells you it's Edom, so-called white man. All right. So, moving on. All right. I just don't want to leave nothing out. Okay. I typed in who were the four prominent rulers of the Diadochi at its end. It says the most notable Diadochi include Ptolemy, Antigonus, Cassander, and Seleucus as the last remaining at the end of the wars of the successors, ruling in Egypt, Asia Minor, Macedon, and Persia, respectively, with Ptolemaic, Antigonus, and Seleucid dynasties lasting several centuries. Okay. And another thing, all right, let's just look at what a dynasty is, because I just want to, just thought about it just now. All right. Really, Seleucid, right? It says a Seleucid Empire was a Greek state in West Asia during the Hellenistic period. It was founded, hold on. It was founded in 312 BC by the Macedonian general Seleucus the first Nicator, following the division of meaning coming after the division of the Macedonian Empire founded by Alexander the Great and ruled by the Seleucid dynasty to its annexation, etc., etc. All right. Now, once again, getting that word Hellenism. All right. So you understand Hellenism. It says Hellenism refers to the spread and blend of ancient Greek culture, language, and ideas, philosophy, art, politics across the Mediterranean and Near East after Alexander the Great's conquests. All right, and it's picked up after, his death. This is off of Merriam-Webster. It says, for the definition of the word Hellenism, where is it? I just saw it up here, man. It says devotion to or imitation, meaning adopting, taking on, copying of ancient Greek thought, customs, or styles. So you had what? Them eating pork, wearing togas and all that, tattoos. Like you see Jake now, you see so-called black men go to college and be a part of a Kappa Phi Kappa or whatever. This is an example. Hellenism was going on back then. It was basically just the adoption of that Greek way of life and Greek culture. Okay. So Daniel 8. So now we understand that now. Okay. Daniel 8 and 9 now says, and out of one of them came forth a little horn. So, and this is another uh representation. So we see, here, don't worry about that third one, but you see that, and that was broken. The great horn, Alexander the Great was broken. He died. Then it said four notable ones. This represents, this he goat, or that, that ram, it's like that goat that represents that goat represents the Greek Empire, and the four notable ones represent the the generals of Alexander the Great. This is still, going on in Daniel's vision here. Okay. It says, now out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. And the pleasant land is talking about the land of Israel. All right. All right. So I'm gonna read it again. It says, and out of one of them, right? Meaning out of one of the four generals that had Alexander's kingdom, split it up. All right. Which is talking about Seleucus. All right. Out of his seed line, because remember, as we read, right, the Diadochi, they split up the kingdom, and one of them was, one of the most was what one of the most notable was Seleucus. Okay, Seleucus the first Nicator. All right, let me get this out of here. All right, so we read all that. Okay, so Seleucid Empire. Okay, this is just a map, a region he controlled. And you see, so over here, part of it, goes over here in Israel. All right, but I said out of one of them, what? Talking about out of Seleucus came what? Forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great. First Maccabees 1. It says in verse 10, it says, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been in hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. Okay, so, and now I said it already, but the Greek Empire represents the brass in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and that third beast in Daniel's vision from chapter 7. All right. But this, all right, so this is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. The scriptures literally name him here. See how it links up right with the Bible, with the other scriptures here in Daniel? So how the hell can you deny the Apocrypha? Okay. But when you look at Seleucus the first Nicator, right? When you go here, okay, look, I'm gonna read this, right? Because the Seleucid Empire comes from this dude. It says the Seleucid Empire was one of the major powers of the Hellenistic world. You see that? I'm gonna just read that part. Okay. The major power, you can't just skip over that, man. Right? But when you go down to his who he is succeeded by, all right, you keep on going. Successor, it says Antiochus the first Soter, right? Let me just see something. Okay, then you go to Antiochus the second Theos. Seleucus the second Callinicus. If I'm saying that, if I'm going through the okay, from this guy, right? It says his issue. He had 5 children, and this is all still part of wait, let me just make sure here, okay? Because issue means that is descendant. So it says Antiochus the first, right? Slovakia. Looking at successors. Seleucus, right? Beginning of the Seleucid Empire, with him. And his issue, he had who? Antiochus the first Soter, who was his successor or co-ruler from around 292 BC. That's what that C means. Stands for circa, basically meaning around that time. Antiochus the first Soter, right? It's this guy. Okay, then he his issue, one of his descendants was who? Antiochus the second Theos. So we're tracking it here. He was his successor, right? Then he also had Uh, some of his children was what? Seleucus II Callinicus. I'm saying that right? All right. Then this guy Seleucus II Callinicus Pogan, right? One of his children was who? Antiochus III the Great. Okay. And who was one of his descendants? When you go here, Antiochus, right? Issue. It says in genealogy and wills of persons, issue means all their lineal descendants, their children. He had Antiochus the Fourth, right? Epiphanes, Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. Okay. This guy. This was that wicked root that was being talked about in First Maccabees, chapter 1, and that little horn in Daniel the 8th chapter. All right. So Daniel 8 and 9 says, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, right, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. All right. Antiochus Epiphanes, fourth, he came into power, got a large army and started conquering. He started going toward the south and even to the land of Israel, which is the pleasant land. All right. Verse 10, it says, and it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. All right. And this is talking about what he did, which you could find in the account of the first Maccabees 1, which we're going to read about a little bit, but how he was persecuting the Jews. Okay. Because Northern Kingdom by this time was already on the other side of the world. The thing with Arsareth, they left on the Assyrian Empire, so the Jews, primarily Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, was in the land at this time. All right. So yeah, let me just read a little bit about him here. Antiochus IV, Epiphanes IV, was king of the Seleucid Empire. So now we was tracking the whole thing, okay, from Persians and Medes, Greeks taking over, splitting of the kingdom, of Alexander the Great's kingdom, to Seleucus, to his descendants here. Okay? And all this, and the Hellenism and everything, right? Now it says, was king of the Seleucid Empire from 175 BC until his death in 164 BC. Notable events during Antiochus's reign include his near conquest of Ptolemaic Egypt, his persecution of the Jews of Judea and Samaria, and the rebellion of the Jewish Maccabees. Okay? That's what we read about in the book of in the book of the Maccabees. The son of King Antiochus III the Great. Antiochus IV's accession to the throne was controversial. He was seen as a usurper by some after the death of his brother. All right. So look, it says Antiochus' often eccentric behavior and capricious actions led some of his contemporaries to call him Epimanes the Mad, which means the mad. All right. But let me just, get down here. All right. It says the Seleucids, like the Ptolemies before them, held a suzerainty over Judea. This means what? A person, state, or polity who has supremacy and dominant influence over the foreign policy and economic relations of another subordinate party of polity, but allows internal autonomy to that subordinate. All right. It says they respect the Jewish culture and protect the Jewish institutions. This policy was drastically reversed by Antiochus IV, seemingly after what was either a dispute over leadership of the temple in Jerusalem and the office of the high priest, or possibly a revolt whose nature was lost to time after being crushed. There's another Edomite here. Okay. You know, let me just see. Let me go back to the top, actually. All right. Let me just read these real quick. It says, according to First Maccabees, after restoring allowance, Antiochus IV issued decrees aimed at helping the most enthusiastically pro-Greek faction of Hellenized Jews. See that? Hellenized Jews. They were Israelites going all the way back at this time that took on Greek culture. It says against the traditionalists. He outlawed Jewish rites and traditions. Meaning what? The practice, the laws and everything, the things we would do by the law, like, sacrifices and all that, that was gone with. Okay. It says, and the temple in Jerusalem was forcibly changed to a syncretic Greek Jewish cult that included worship of Zeus. The Greek historian Diodorus wrote that Antiochus sacrificed a great swine at the image of Moses and at the altar of the Most High that stood in the outward court, and sprinkled them with the blood of the sacrifice. He commanded likewise that the books by which they were taught to hate all other nations should be sprinkled with the broth made of swine's flesh, and he put out the lamp called by them immortal, which burns continually in the temple. Because I remember, even the law talks about a lamp burning, day and night or whatever, something like that. So lock it from wrong. But it says, lastly, he forced the high priest and the other Jews to eat swine's flesh. These decrees were a departure from typical Seleucid practice, which did not mean, they weren't something that basically was decreed by the Seleucid Empire. It says, which did not attempt to, but this happened because of prophecy. It says, which did not attempt to suppress local religions in their empire. Though they may be similar to other instances in the Hellenistic era, when local polities were punished for revolt against their imperial suzerain by having their autonomy and local laws repealed and local shrines moved from their control. The city of Jerusalem was sacked a second time in the disorder. Antiochus established a Greek military citadel called the Acra in Jerusalem to serve as a stronghold for Hellenized Jews in a Greek military garrison. This happened from 168 to 167 BC. And, you can read, First Maccabees and Second Maccabees on your own time and all of that. It says such steps triggered a revolt against his rule, known as the Maccabean Revolt. It says scholars of the Second Temple Judaism therefore sometimes refer to Antiochus' reign as the Antiochian crises for the Jews, traditionally as expressed in the first and second books of the Maccabees. The Maccabean Revolt was painted as a national resistance to a foreign political and cultural oppression. In modern times, however, scholars have argued that Antiochus IV was more intervening in a civil war between the traditionalist Jews in the country and the Hellenized Jews in Jerusalem. All right. But let me go to the top, right, to where it says rebellion of the Jewish Maccabees. All right. It says here, now listen to this. The Maccabean Revolt, or the Hasmonean Revolt, was a Jewish rebellion led by the Maccabees against the Seleucid Empire and against Hellenistic influence on Jewish life. Because when you read what you're going to read, they weren't down, basically what Antiochus Epiphanes agreed, the fourth agreed, what he decreed, Salakia, they man, these brothers stood up for righteousness. Okay. They stood up to do what's right, and the Lord was with the Maccabees here. He was with them. All right. It says, that they weren't against all that Greek culture being spread in there. They weren't against the wicked decrees being made to do. That Esau came with back then. So even back in this time, we had that struggle with Esau, man. Okay, dealing with this damn devil. All right, but it says the main phase of the revolt lasted from 167 to 160 BCE and ended with the Seleucids in control of Judea. But conflict between the Maccabees, Hellenized Jews, and the Seleucids continued until 134 BCE, with the Maccabees eventually attaining independence. All right, and all right, it just goes into more of it. Okay. And this also goes, where Hanukkah comes from. Let me go here. First Maccabees, the first chapter. We'll read through it. Verse 11 now says, in those days, so let's talk about how Antiochus Epiphanes came into power. Verse 11, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant or agreement with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. Okay. So there were wicked Israelites wanting to go, take part in heathen customs and practices and all that, right? It says, so this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people who were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen, whereupon they built a place of exercise in Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. Now when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt that he might have the domain of two realms. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen and a great navy, and made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. All right, now, um, you know, let me keep reading. Verse 19. Thus they got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils thereof. And after that, Antiochus had smitten Egypt. He returned again in the 140 and third year, went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered proudly into the sanctuary, and took away the golden altar, and the candlestick of light, and all the vessels thereof, and the table of the showbread, and the pouring vessels, and the vials, and the censers of gold, and the veil, and the crown, and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. Did not we just read about that? I believe we just read about that, right? In the specific down here, right? Unless it was pertaining to a different part. But basically, he did these things. All right. Verse 23. He took also. So he came into Jerusalem doing all of this. It says he took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels, and he also says also he took the hidden treasures which he found. This is all in the Apocrypha. All right. The Apocrypha doesn't go against the standard version of the Bible that people are used to. It says, and when he had taken away all, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre and spoken very proudly, because this was the damn devil speaking, prideful as hell, man. Therefore, there was a great mourning in Israel, in every place where they were, so that the princes and elders mourned. The virgins and young men were made feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. So just imagine, what's going on back in this time. Every bridegroom took up lamentation. Imagine the great mourning Jake had back here. It says, and she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness. The land also was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was covered with confusion. And after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute unto the cities of Judah. So after 2 years, Antiochus sent his collector of tribute to the cities of Judah, who came unto Jerusalem with a great multitude, and spake peaceable words unto them, but all was deceit. So they came, acting like, um, you know, everything was good, but Esau was lying. He's a damn devil. It says, for when they had given him credence, when they believed him, basically he fell suddenly upon the city and smote it very sore. Antiochus' collective tribute. All right, when they, Jake believed him, he fell. He started wreaking havoc. It says he fell suddenly upon the city and smote it very sore and destroyed much people of Israel. And when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire and pulled down the houses and walls thereof on every side. But the women and children took they captive and possessed the cattle. Then builded they the city of David with a great and strong wall, and with mighty towers, and made it a stronghold for them. And they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. I believe that's what this is basically. Yeah, as it says here, according to First Maccabees. Yeah, that's what we reading about right now in the scriptures. Okay. We read. Okay, it says they stored it also with armor and victuals, and when they had gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there, and so they became a sore snare. It says, for it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary and an evil adversary to Israel. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary and defiled it, insomuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them. Whereupon the city was made an habitation of strangers, and became strange to those that were born in her, and her own children left her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned in the morning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. Also, it says, as had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned in the morning. Moreover, King Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, that guy we was talking about, wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. And listen, this is the Hellenization. And everyone, this is the Hellenization by force. It says, and everyone should leave his laws. So meaning they gotta leave off the customs that they that they of their own nation. So he wrote to his whole kingdom. It says, so all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. That So basically, Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, he wrote this. Um, he had this decree that people, should leave, um, the nation, the laws and cultures of their own people, their own nations, and follow the Greek ways and cultures of life. That's that Hellenism. Okay, this is tracking it so like on point. All right. Now that we went through the background of the Hellenism and how it began and all that. Verse 43 says, "Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath." So see, Israelites also, you know, they follow this decree. So you would think in the New Testament, right? Because of this Hellenism that was going on, all right, and happening to the Israelites, generation after generation, going into the New Testament, you would have what? You would have Israelites raised up in Greek ways of life, thinking that they Greeks. See, so the Greeks that once again repented and believed on Yahweh and everything were Israelites. Those Gentiles in the New Testament are Israelites, right? It says, "For the king has sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said, should die. In the self same manner wrote he to his whole kingdom, and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Judah to sacrifice city by city. Then many of the people were gathered unto them, to wit, everyone that forsook the law, and so they committed evils in the land. And all right, it says, and drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for succor. All right, and then later on, Judas Maccabees and his brother raise up. Mattathias does something as well. Right, but he passes away. But this is what is going into here in Daniel the eighth, and then you can read about all the rest of the evil stuff Antiochus Epiphanes did to the Israelites during that time of the Maccabees. You could just read about it in the books of First Maccabees, etc. Right? It says, so verse 10, Daniel 8 and 10, and the wax great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. All right. And these stars is talking about Israelites. It's talking about the Israelites, man. Okay. All right. Um, and you can read like Genesis 37, it references Israelites as stars as well. Genesis 37, verse 9. Says, and he dreamed yet another dream and told it his brethren and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. 11 stars are two, represent, the other tribes of Israel. And also Revelation 12 and 1, it says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. This represents Israel. All this, represents Israel. All right, the sun and the moon representing the wisdom, knowledge, understanding given to Israel, laws, mysteries, the prophets, all that given to Israel. But the stars representing the Israelites. So we read back in Daniel 8, oh man, it's Salakia. Damn. It's crazy, bro. It's Salakia. I don't know if you were able to see that, but you can just read Revelation 12, okay? And 1, it references Israelites to stars. So these stars here is, I mean, I even need to get a precept for it, which I mean, yes, I do. But like, once you understand, it's like, who do you think it's talking about? Okay, he didn't fly up into space and start smacking stars down and stepping on them, right? So it's talking about the stuff that he did, all the the evils and atrocities he did to our people back then during the time of the Maccabees. Okay, and this was foretold by the prophet Daniel way before it even happened. Verse 11, it says, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. right? All right, it says, and by him the daily, all right, because he was prideful. He was a prideful person, as you read about him, right? It says, and by him the daily sacrifice, right? Uh, Sloppy. What's going on? Bear with me just 1 second. All right, this is, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. All right, bear with me just 1 second here. Sloppy. You can just skip ahead to where I continue to talk. All right, Salaki. I'm back. But yeah. So all right. So he was prideful, and as it says, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. All right, you know, because what? As it said, the daily sacrifice was taken away, as it said, First Maccabees 1:45, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days. Right, and then it said, in in the place of the sanctuary was cast down, temple was laid waste because he came and ruined it. Right, verse 12, and it says, and an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. All right, meaning the Lord, he allowed Antiochus and his armies to do all of this because of Israel's wickedness. It says, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Right, verse 13. And now Daniel switches back. Okay, he switches back to you know talking about himself basically, and he hears, and these saints here, he's hearing talking about angels. Let me just see what it says here for the word saint. Water wash. All right. It says, bear with me just 1 second again, Salaki. Boy, Salaki, I gotta, it's my surroundings and all that. Anyways, so Daniel 8 and 13. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? So, an angel basically talking to another angel, asking a question, right? Basically saying, how long is all of this going to be? With Antiochus and the Jews being persecuted by him, and the temple being trodden underfoot. How long is all of that going to be? Verse 14. He said unto me, he says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So, 2,300 days being like 6.5 years. All right. And when you look up the time Antiochus came against the Jews, and when Judas Maccabees dedicated the temple, the dates aren't exact from what they show, but it is a close estimate to when it's taking place. All right. Let me just try to see if I can pull it up again. What Did Antiochus begin persecuting Jews? 168 BC. All right. Seleucus, King Antiochus Epiphanes IV, launched a massive campaign of repression against the Jews and Jewish religion in 168 BCE. And was the temple uh, dedicated? Uh, Salakia, by the Maccabees. 65. All right. As once again, it's not exact, but it's like close, right? Because yeah, it's not exact, but it's close. All right. We know that as Elder Yashwama said in lessons before, these time periods things come from the heavens. So with the Lord it's on point. All right. And let me just see what the commentary, just as a quick, see what it says about it. See, let's jump down. Yep. See, little horn being what we can identify the historical fulfillment of this little horn in Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who ruled over Syria and Israel's land under the Seleucid dynasty. There you go. You know. Let's see what it says. Yeah. It trampled them. Antiochus was an infamous persecutor of the Jewish people. So this is on point. All right. Even they agree what this is talking about. Okay. So the angels here, now Daniel's switching back and the angels, asking like, how long is all of this that Antiochus is going to be, coming and causing hell and all that, right? And then angel responds, basically it's going to be 2,300 days, right? Until, the Maccabees, dedicated the temple, which you can see here in First Maccabees. I believe it's in the 4th chapter. If I'm wrong. All right. And that's where we get Hanukkah from. Yeah. First Maccabees 1:59. No, 4:59. You can read about it here. I'll just read this verse. Moreover, Judas and his brethren with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days from the 25th day of the month Castle with mirth and gladness. When they came and cleansed the temple and all that. All right. See? Cleansing the sanctuary. First Maccabees 4:41. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the sanctuary until he had cleansed the sanctuary. All right, so boom. Now verse 15, down later 15, it says interpretation of the vision. And it came to pass when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. So now, right, Daniel, okay, he saw the vision, but he, saw like animals in his vision as we just went through. We went through what it meant. All right. So, but now he's trying to understand what it meant. And as he's doing that, he said, there stood before him, someone that looked like a man. Verse 16. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. And this is talking about, I believe the Archangel Gabriel. Okay. I believe maybe the same angel coming with as it says, it says Gabar Allah and the warrior of the Most High, right? It says the archangel, the angel of the Most High used to send messages of great importance to men, sent to Daniel, to Zacharias, and to Mary. Yeah, you read in Luke, the angel Gabriel came to Mary, to name, about Yahweh Shai. Okay, you read that in Luke the 1st chapter, right? So here, an angel tells the angel Gabriel to make Daniel understand the vision. Verse 17. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Okay? At the time of the end shall be the vision. Not the end times like we're in, but the time of the end of the Greek Empire when Judas Maccabees, etc. happened. All right? So this, so once again, vision is yet for an appointed time. Verse 18, Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed, the end shall be. All right, there you go. The time when the Greeks come against the Medo-Persians, the four generals, Antiochus is coming into power, etc. Not that end times like we're in now. All right, but that's what it's referring to. And Angel Gabriel is going to explain to Daniel what this vision means that he just saw with the ram and the he-goat and everything. Verse 20. The ram, it says the ram's identity. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire. That was what the ram represented. The goat, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia. See, the Greek Empire says, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. That's Alexander the Great. Okay, the he goat, the goat itself represents the Greek Empire. The great horn represents Alexander the Great. Verse 22. Now that being broken, whereas when Alexander, when Alexander died, whereas four stood up for it, right? His four generals, the main four, at the end of the wars of Diadochi or Diadochi, how we say it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. They had those four generals split up in Alexander the Great's empire, right, but not in his power. They weren't direct generals of Alexander, all right, but they had their own ideas and goals they wanted to do, not right, but not like this but not what Alexander had in mind. Verse 23. And in that later time, and Saki, in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to a full, okay. It says the king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, right? In the time period this all revolves around, all right. It says, which is toward the end of the Greek Empire, talking about, all right, this is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. And when it says, an understanding dark sentences and all that, meaning he was cunning and a manipulative person, which he was. All right, we read. All right, and he, king of fierce countenance, he was a damn devil. You read about what happened in 2 Maccabees, the 7th chapter. He was a damn devil, man. Right? Verse 24. And his power shall be mighty. And by the way, as it's set up here, by reason of transgression, right? Because what? When the Lord, as the Lord punishes Israel, it tells you about that in 2 Maccabees 7. The Lord punishes our people, for our wickedness. Okay? This was some hell, man, put on Jake. I'm telling you. Imagine how much worse is going to be in Jacob's trouble. This was a horrible time for Jake, man. All right. Verse 24 says, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper in practice and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Right. Yeah. And this is what Antiochus did. He persecuted the Jews. All right. Which you read about. All that stuff he did in First Maccabees. So this is already prophesying about him. See? Verse 25. And through his policy, all right, also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, through the different decrees and policies he made, right? He caused craft to prosper. It says, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, in his mind. He prideful, all right? He was a prideful person. It says, and by peace shall destroy many. Yeah, because once again, he was a cunning man, and what one of his tributaries came, and as it says, when they gave him credence, right, when they believed the collector of tribute. So like I said, tributaries. When one of Antiochus Epiphanes collectors of tributes came to the Jews, to the Israelites, right? It says when Israel believed him, he fell suddenly upon them, made a sore like destruction of them, right? It says, he also, talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, it says, he shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. Meaning he didn't die by someone in war or physically killing him, but by the Lord plaguing him. Right? And I'm gonna just get that real quick. This is also, what he said is also a message to Esau, man. To the rest of his people. Right? Yeah. Let me get this real quick. All right, let me get this just to show you how this man passed. Oh man. All right. Get right to the point. Second Maccabees chapter 9. All right, let's just get this real quick so we know what it's talking about. I'm gonna jump around, but you could read this whole chapter. All right. In verse 1, about that time came Antiochus with dishonor out of the country of Persia. Right. So it's talking about Antiochus. I'm gonna jump down to verse 5. But the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, smote him with an incurable and invisible plague. Or as soon as he had spoken these words, a pain of the bowels that was remediless came upon him, and sore torment of the inner parts, and that most justly, meaning that most rightly, you know, that was proper for him. Why? For he had tormented other men's bowels with many and strange torments. And you could read about that in Second Maccabees 7. Howbeit he nothing at all ceased from his bragging, but still was filled with pride, breathing out fire in his rage against the Jews, and commanding to haste the journey. But it came to pass that he fell down from his chariot, carried violently, so that having a sore fall, all the members of his body were much pain. And thus he that a little afore thought he might command the waves of the sea. Right? So proud. And that's how Esau is today, even. But this, specifically talking about Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, right? Before the Lord, put that smackdown on him, it says, and thus he that a little afore thought he might command the waves of the sea. So proud was he beyond the condition of men. So imagine how prideful this man was. As it says, he shall magnify himself in his heart. Okay? It told you up here that where was it? Wait, did it say it up here? I don't remember. Okay? Basically telling you how he was prideful. Okay? It says, he shall magnify himself in his heart. You know, that's what he did in his mind, right? He thought it was with the mind. He said he a little forethought he might command the waves of the sea. So proud was he beyond the condition of man, and weighed the high mountains in a balance. This is how prideful he thought he was, man. So like on a great magnitude like that. And this is how Esau is today, prideful, man. Because the Lord gave him the world. We put him in power. I said powership, rulership right now. Gave him power currently. You know, the devil thinks that he wants to be like the Most High, you know, but the Lord's going to, throw him down. It says, was now cast on the ground and carried in a horse litter, showing forth unto all the manifest power of the Most High. So the Lord judged Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. The Lord judged, all right, this wicked man, wicked ass Edomite man. All right. This is a sculpture of him. The Lord judged his ass. All right. The Lord's going to do the same thing to this devil nowadays, to the devil, he's gonna throw him down, and in the kingdom he's gonna be so down to the point to where, as it says in Isaiah 14, they're gonna look at him like, is this the man? Right? Verse 9, it says, so that the worms rose up out of the body of this wicked man, and whilst he lived in sorrow and pain, his flesh fell away, and the filthiness of his smell was noisome to all his army. Imagine that. His smell like worms coming out of your body. All right. He was in sorrow, pain, his flesh falling off of him, falling away. His smell is disturbing his army. And the man that thought a little afore he could reach the stars of heaven, no man could endure to carry for his intolerable stink. And that's Esau has that pride. These devils nowadays have that pride, especially these elites. Verse 11, he therefore being plagued, he began to leave off his great pride and to come to the knowledge of himself by the scourge or the torment of the Most High, his pain increasing every moment. So his pain was getting worse and worse. So when the Lord plagued him, that pride got up out of there. You know, the Lord was putting belt to ass on him. Verse 12, and when he himself could not abide his own smell, he said these words, right? It is meet to be meaning it is right to be subject unto the Most High, and that a man that is mortal should not proudly think of himself if he were the Most High. See, you know, and that's so he got humbled. The Lord humbled his ass. All right, the same thing will happen to this damn devil now. The Lord's gonna humble him. You know, this devil thinks that he's so proudful. When the Lord destroys his place, all right, you know that's gonna be the end of Esau's rulership, and after that, Esau's going into slavery. Esau's going to be completely humbled, man. All right, they're gonna be completely humbled. We get a quick precept and come back to this. Daniel 4 and verse 37. It says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways judgment. And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase." See? So there you go. Abase meaning bring low, humble. Right? So this is the book of Daniel, chapter 8 now, and remember verse. So when it says, "But he shall be broken without hand," because you see what the Lord did to him, right? You know, it wasn't man that killed him, but it was the Lord, right? Jumping down, verse second Maccabees 9:28. "Thus the murderer and blasphemer Antiochus Epiphanes, having suffered most grievously as he entreated other men, so died he a miserable death in a strange country in the mountains. And Philip, so he died, all right, a miserable death." Verse 29, "Philip, that was brought up with him, carried away his body, who also, fearing the son of Antiochus, went into Egypt to Ptolemy's Philometor." All right. So there you go. The Lord killed him. Verse 26, Daniel 8:26. "In the vision of the evening and the morning," so the angel was breaking it down to Daniel, what that vision was talking about. "In the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told is true." So this vision was true. All right. This vision, which was prophecy, all right, it happened. It says, "Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days." See, it wasn't for the time period Daniel was living in. It was for the time period that it was supposed to happen at. All right. Verse 27, "And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward, I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it." All right. So that's basically, I wanted to get some history on that. All right. Lord willing, this lesson was edifying to the elect. Just leave it at that. All praises to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Hakudash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, ever well. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. Shalom to the elect.